Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. I'm so excited to talk about the Investigative Editing Corps with two fabulous investigative journalists, both hailing from the University of Maryland. With us is Deb Nelson, who's a professor of investigative journalism at the Phillip Merrill College of Journalism and Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at the University of Maryland, and her colleague, Sean Mussenden, who is the principal lecturer and data editor at the Phillip Merrill College of Journalism and the Howard Center, also at the University of Maryland. So welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
So knowing that, we like to keep our episodes about 20, 25 minutes, we don't have a lot of time. So tell us a little bit about the Investigative Editing Corps for people who don't know what it is and maybe how you got involved.
Okay, so Rose Ciota, a fantastic investigative journalist who worked at a number of large newspapers. When she became a board member on Investigative Reporters and Editors, really saw that there was a great need for smaller newspapers that didn't have big staffs but had the desire to do investigative reporting, that there's a great need for them to have access to resources to do it. Mm-hmm. So she came up with the idea of creating a nonprofit that would essentially connect experienced investigative editors with editors and reporters at smaller newspapers that wanted to pursue a project, but had small staffs and nobody in-house with experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that definitely gets to some of the seismic changes in the industry that, sort of the institutional knowledge, the long-term editors and even reporters are just not as present any longer, or being pulled away and doing different things. So it's definitely serving a need. Now, Sean, how did you, as the data editor extraordinaire, how did you get connected with this group?
So I got connected when Deb asked me to join the team to work on a project with the Toledo Blade a couple of years ago. My specialty is doing data-driven investigative reporting, and there was a big need on this project to obtain and then analyze data, and I worked with a couple of reporters there, and Deb, and a couple of editors there on that project.
I should say that what they wanted to do. So the Toledo Blade applied to Rose's nonprofit. They submitted, a memo on what they wanted to do, what they wanted to investigate, and said they wanted to look at the affordable housing crisis in Toledo. And their question was, why? In a city like Toledo, with an average, not high cost of living, were low-income residents struggling to find housing. Mm-hmm. How was the pandemic affecting it? This was in 2020, so they're right in the middle of the pandemic. And because it dealt with housing, and I thought data could really give us a picture of what's happening there and help us get to the why, that this really called for Sean's expertise. So I invited him to partner, but he's also such a good teacher. And part of the mission of Rose's organization is to not just help out with, bringing in some resources to do a project, but to leave having kind of worked with the newsroom staff so that they can carry on. So, to show them the ropes and to teach them the skills that they need going forward. And he brought that to the table. He teaching them the data skills they need to do not just this project, but future projects.
Well, and I'm part of Sean's fan club anyway, because he's taught some data journalism webinars for MDDC in the summer. And I think it's a real shift, I think, when the public or sort of when you traditionally think of journalism, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to report for these sources, I'm going to do this and that. And I feel like that's almost like grassroots reporting. It's very individual. But there's so much information out there. And I think we all suffer sometimes for information overload and all these inputs. And I'm just curious, Sean, just to take a little detour into data and its place in reporting, like how do you kind of sit between, okay, you're talking about someone's lived experience and then you're making sense of all these numbers and figures that are coming in through census or housing authority or whatever data set you get? Like, what's that tension look like?
Yeah, I mean, using data and interviewing it using, programming languages or software tools allows you to ask questions and get answers that aren't accessible through, sort of more traditional means. Two ways I think it really helps. One is it allows us to put in context something that we've identified through our reporting. So in the Toledo Blade project, for example, anecdotally they heard that evictions from public housing were happening a lot. How much? How did that compare to other tenants? The only way to, or other landlords, the only way to look at that question really was to look at all evictions in Toledo and figure out where public housing stood there. And it turned out they were one of the most active evictors. So it helps you go big and really move from the realm of the anecdote to some broader pattern. The other thing it helps with is to identify people and sources. So we often think of data journalism as, crunching numbers or statistics, but really it's also about finding like a needle in a haystack and thinking, okay, I need somebody this is the pattern I'm seeing. And to illustrate this pattern, I need somebody who meets these characteristics, and you can use data reporting to do that.
Mm-hmm. And actually a little bit closer to home, and I don't know if this was just two great ideas happening in two different parts of the country. I think it was Danielle Ohl had done a report out of Annapolis about their public housing and rate of evictions. So are you seeing this as sort of like a topic that's coming up more and more because, or was it just two great ideas that happened to be near the same time? And actually, are you even familiar with her reporting on them?
Yeah.
I thought she was
and Danielle was alone here, and we, I think, worked. I don't know if both of us worked with her. That was a tremendous package. I think, we did ours maybe a little bit after that one came out. And we'd also looked at this question too with some reporting we did through the Howard Center a couple months before.
Mm-hmm. So, it sounds like the Toledo Blade had some questions. They were kind of testing their hypothesis. If they hadn't gotten connected with the investigative editing core, how do projects like that normally happen? Do they just say, oh, well, I'll do a feature story on this one eviction, or do you find in your work that smaller newspapers are taking a stab at data, or do they just do a traditional package?
Yeah, I mean, some smaller newspapers will have people with that capacity. And the sort of essential tool of getting structured data, like in a spreadsheet and analyzing it, is something that more and more reporters have. The more challenging piece here that I think we were really able to help with was to teach them how to do web scraping. So many of your listeners are probably familiar with Merrill case search, a way of looking up court cases on the web. There's one of these in Toledo. Courts are really bad typically about giving people like a dump of their database so you can ask big questions about it. So in Toledo, we've also done this work in Maryland too, writing a web scraper to programmatically troll the site and capture that data. that's a little bit more complicated. And so we were able to assist the Blade and teach one of their web producers and graphics producers, Danielle Gamble, how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing the editors hoped to get from it, they had two terrific editors, Kim Bates and Michael Walton. One of the things they wanted to learn was how to, they're very busy. When you talk about small staff, it's not just a small staff of reporters, but of editors as well, turning out a daily story, a daily newspaper, with multiple deadlines a day. How can they organize a project like this so that they can achieve it in between everything else going on? And so I think that's something that we could, first of all, the commitment they made to Rose to do the project provided them with incentive to do it. They already had incentive, but half their city council was indicted just a couple weeks after we started this project.
And oh my gosh!
But by meeting each week and setting out a task list and staying highly organized, they were able to continue forward progress on this project, even through the pandemic, the worst of the pandemic. And I think that's also where having a data component helps too, because while you're off doing daily reporting, the data can be working for you. I don't know, how would you describe that, Sean?
It's often on these projects when there's some kind of data component, we do some initial reporting and research at the beginning, and then there's a period where we need to figure out what questions we want to ask, get data, and then clean it, and then analyze it, and then use that to inform reporting. So sometimes that happens in parallel, and sometimes it happens where the sort of principal reporting pauses for a couple weeks while we do some analysis, and then it continues. So it gave Danielle, it was nice actually, it gave Danielle a lot of time to learn this, and instead of me just doing it, it was like coaching her and working with her repeatedly.
Well, and that was something I wanted to ask, like how, Deb, you earlier had said that, you kind of helped create the project plan and you all met on a weekly basis, but like, what does that support look like in the context of this program in terms of helping that newsroom? I mean, Sean, you said you were coaching Danielle, but, like what was your active involvement with the publication?
Well, we met once a week. That's part of the program. We set up a weekly meeting, and that allows us to set goals, by things we want to achieve by the next meeting. And I can't emphasize how important that is when you have a small staff, not a lot of time to come up with that checklist of that to-do list in terms of, keeping us moving forward. In between those meetings, both of us were on call for any questions they had for troubleshooting. And then as the reporting and the analysis continued, and as we headed towards publication, we were able to help out in story organizing and story editing. Both of the in-house editors were very good story editors. They're quite talented.
Yeah.
So it was just, working together on what is the structure for an investigative story. We have a lot of findings. How do we structure, put that all together, the people stories, the data findings, in a way that'll be a compelling read. And I think it turned out with an extraordinarily compelling read. The reporters found individual case studies that, as Sean mentioned, we knew what the profile was of people who were being kicked out. People who owed $8. I think that one of the opening anecdotes is somebody owed $8 in back rent. That's what they found in the data, and they were able to track down the people to make the data come alive. So you're seeing really a synergistic relationship between data and people. Without the data, the people are just anecdotes that the housing authority could say, oh, that's just a
That's the
an
outlier.
exception.
Right.
Yeah, that's the outlier. Without people, the data is just numbers, right? But together, they are just a powerful couple, a real power couple.
Well, and I want to understand sort of how that data reporting is infiltrating all aspects of our of reporting, because it comes up in how you choose data sets. But before I get to that, I want to close the loop on the Toledo project and ask what happened afterwards. It is a compelling project. If listeners want to go to investigativeediting.org, and I think it's under projects, you can read all of that cycles projects, and it's well written. The graphics are amazing, and it really tells a powerful story. But what happened afterwards?
I got to remember.
Yeah, me too.
It's so long ago now.
Trail of impact.
They did make some changes, but I just can't remember now what they
I can't
what
either.
they were.
Yeah, there were some. I want to say that right to counsel, maybe.
Yeah, they made some very specific reforms, but I'd have to look those up.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing that I find so interesting about when you're working with data sets. And just to bring it a little bit closer to home, like there's certainly there's Danielle Oles reporting in Annapolis, but I'm thinking more of the tax sale and all the stories that are coming out about, like someone hasn't paid their water bill, and so for $50 their house is going in the tax sale. And there's been a lot of legislation for the past couple years around the idea of the tax sale, and whether that is an appropriate use of government power, and whether like how to solve that question. And I think that's where data can be so helpful in making change, because you're making sense of all this publicly available information, but who knows what to do with like all that binary code. It can be really confusing. So when you're looking at reporting, especially like in the Howard Center, one of the things that makes journalism so powerful and effective is the change that can happen. So how do you kind of harness that data to tell stories and then encourage that change to happen? Or do you even encourage that change to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think as investigative reporters, we always think about impact, and this work takes a long time. We put in a lot of effort, and we don't necessarily suggest specific courses of action, but we call attention to problems, and often we're reporting out solutions that have solved this problem in, say, other places. We'll report on those, but what people do with that information is part of how we measure the effectiveness of our work, for sure. Yeah.
Man, the data allows us to identify not just the problems, but the source of the problems with enough precision to point to what the solutions are. And the people's stories, the consequences of those problems, as told through the people, provides the motivation, the impetus for policymakers to make change. We want, people, when they read the story, to spill their coffee and say, "This shouldn't happen."
Right.
Call their alderman and say, "Well, this has got to change."
Right. That's the shining light in all the dark corners, and expecting that people will be affected by what you're writing and what you're reporting on. So it's and this is, I think, just one example of the work that you do. I know, and actually, as we kind of wind down, I wanted to ask about the next project that you're doing for the Investigative Editing Corps. I know it's still in development, but is there anything that you want to share about either lessons learned in doing your second cycle, or something about the project itself?
What can we say, Deb? I'm not.
It can be all
say
top
who we're
secret.
working?
I get it.
Can we say who we're working with?
Yeah, I think we could say who we
Yeah.
are.
Okay. Yeah. So, God, I'm blanking on the name.
So it's in Concord, New Hampshire,
Yeah,
correct?
the Monitor, Concord Monitor, right? Yeah, and so we're working with the editor of that paper and a reporter who is a Report for America fellow who is there covering housing. Also has a lot of daily responsibilities, but I think came to the core with a really interesting proposal, one that could benefit from some data reporting and some coaching on investigative reporting.
So you're sticking with housing. Is there anything that you feel like you're going to adjust in your in the way that you're approaching this project that maybe you learned from the last project, or was it a good sort of? Is everyone so different that you approach it as a standalone?
Really, you have to approach it as a standalone, and that's the beauty of the program. Is we have a little bit less staffing, smaller newsroom in this case, and so we have to adjust the game plan to accommodate that. Yeah, we have the same level of dedication from editors and reporters. I love the challenge. And I love having Sean as my partner. I grabbed him again for because honestly, the data, the ability to do data in smaller newsrooms is often one of the greatest needs. I mean, the smaller newsrooms often don't have that capacity in-house, and they don't have the time or the resources to send staff to learn how to do it. And this way we can bring that right into their newsroom. And they and their communities can benefit greatly from that.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And often these are at some of these smaller papers, they tend to be younger, sort of often less experienced reporters, but they are all the ones we've worked with, very smart, very talented, and you sort of open the door for them and show them, and they just run through it. So it's been a really, really exciting experience.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful to hear, sort of that path forward and a way to really kind of make sure that change continues to occur and that those stories come to light. So thank you both so much for coming to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. And we'll have to have you back when your next reporting project is ready for prime time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
This is great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, @mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.